High in the rugged mountains of Nazi-occupied Norway, a fortress of concrete clung to the edge of a frozen gorge. Inside its walls, deep beneath pipes and steel walkways, a colorless liquid trickled into pressurized tanks. It looked like water, but it wasn't. It was something far more dangerous. This was heavy water, deuterium oxide, the key ingredient the Nazis needed to advance their quest to create an atomic bomb. And if Hitler got it before the Allies did, the war, the world, might have ended very differently. But one winter night, a small group of Norwegian commandos skied through blizzards and darkness to save the world from this bleak and explosive fate. This is the story of Operation Gunnercide. Back in 1938, German scientists had made a terrifying discovery: nuclear fission. By splitting the atom, they'd unleashed a force unlike anything the world had ever seen, and almost immediately, both the Allies and the Axis began racing towards a single goal: to create a nuclear weapon. But while the Allies scattered their research across universities, military labs, and secret bunkers, the Nazis focused their efforts on a single strategy, one that required an extremely rare and volatile material. That's where Vemork came in. Perched above a narrow gorge in southern Norway, the Vemork hydroelectric plant had been producing heavy water since the mid-1930s. When the Nazis invaded Norway in 1940, they seized the plant, and with it, the only industrial-scale supply of heavy water in all of Europe. With Vemork in their hands, Germany now had the means to build a nuclear reactor, and from there, possibly, the atomic bomb. The Allies were watching, and they knew they had to act fast. In November 1942, British forces launched Operation Freshman, their first attempt to destroy the facility. 2 gliders were sent in, towed across the North Sea by bombers and packed with highly trained soldiers skilled in demolition, explosives, and sabotage. But the mission ended in complete disaster. Both gliders crashed into the mountains, and survivors were captured by the Gestapo. They were tortured and executed under direct orders from Hitler himself. The message was clear: attempts of sabotage would be met with certain death. But the need to strike again was urgent. Heavy water production had resumed almost immediately, and with each passing week, the Nazi bomb project crept closer to success. So the British Special Operations Executive devised a new plan. This time, they wouldn't send in their own. They would recruit Norwegians, men who knew the terrain, who could blend in with local villagers, speak the language, and move like ghosts through snow. They would be trained in Britain, equipped with the tools of sabotage, and then dropped into their homeland under the cover of darkness. This new mission was called Operation Gunnercide. It would be precise, ruthless, and silent, and failure was not an option. The man they chose to lead them was Joachim Ronnenberg, just 23 years old, but already a veteran of the resistance. He was tough, intelligent, and ice-cold under pressure, and alongside him were men just like him, hardened by winter, loyal to their country, and burning with a quiet defiance. Their mission was to parachute into the mountains, survive the brutal cold, link up with a small reconnaissance team already operating behind enemy lines, and then destroy the heavy water plant from within. They would carry no identification, wear no insignia. If they were caught, they'd be tortured and killed, but they went on anyway. And on the night of February 16, 1943, the Gunnercide team leapt from their aircraft out into a blizzard. Snow howled around them. The ground below was nothing but black forest and jagged ice. They were cold, wet, miles off course, and well behind enemy lines. It would take them days to reach their contact team, days spent trekking through waist-deep snow with frostbitten fingers, empty bellies, and the weight of the world on their shoulders. But they kept going, because they weren't just fighting for Norway. They were fighting to stop Hitler from changing the course of history. For days, the Gunnercide team pushed through some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Blizzards swept the highlands, temperatures dropped well below -30. Food was scarce, shelter was nearly impossible. Every step was a battle against the elements, against exhaustion, against doubt. But eventually the men reached their destination, a remote hut deep in the forest near Hardangervidda Plateau. There, waiting for them, was the advance party, a Norwegian reconnaissance team that had been living off the land for months. They'd already scouted the plant, watched German patrols, and studied the layout, and now, together, the two groups would become one unified strike team. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the facility, destroy the heavy water production line, and vanish without a trace. The Vemork plant sat like a fortress carved into a mountain. Built on a rocky ledge above a 200-metre gorge, it was nearly impossible to reach undetected. The only proper entrance was a narrow suspension bridge guarded day and night by heavily armed German soldiers. So the team chose a different route. They'd approach from below, through the gorge itself. They'd climb the steep, ice-slicked rock walls in the dead of night and sneak into the facility through a hidden maintenance tunnel, a narrow cable shaft barely wide enough to crawl through. On the night of February 27th, the team moved out under the cover of snow and silence. The descent into the gorge was treacherous. Loose rocks, deep snowdrift, frozen riverbeds. One slip could send a man plunging into the ravine. But they moved with discipline, like ghosts on skis carving through the dark. And at the bottom, they crossed the icy river and began a long vertical climb up the far side, hauling themselves up through snow-covered trees and jagged rocks. It took hours, but finally they reached the access tunnel. One by one, the men crawled inside, squeezing through the black, narrow shaft with their boots scraping metal and their breaths slow and silent. At the end of the tunnel, they emerged inside the plant itself, beneath the very floors where German soldiers were working. They split into two teams. Half stayed behind to guard the exit and keep watch, and the others moved deeper into the plant, heading for the basement chamber that housed the electrolysis tanks, the heart of heavy water production. Machines whirred, pipes hissed. The men could hear footsteps and voices above them as German workers moved through the upper levels. One wrong sound, one false move, and it would all be over. In total silence, they unpacked their explosives, 18 charges. Each one was carefully shaped, placed, and timed. They worked quickly, with gloves off, hands trembling from the cold, but steady with purpose. And when they were done, they left one final detail. A British military-issued machine gun magazine dropped deliberately near the scene. This was no accident. It was a message. If the Germans believed this was a British job, they might just spare the local civilians from punishment. A silent shield for the innocent, laid beside a ticking fuse. The fuses were lit, the team turned and slipped back into the darkness the way they came. And at 1 a.m, a thunderous blast shook the walls of Vemork. The electrolysis chambers, the very core of Germany's heavy water program, were obliterated. And so was Germany's immediate path to the bomb. By dawn, German engineers were on site, staring at the wreckage with panic and confusion. They were furious. Someone had been inside, and whoever they were, they knew exactly what to hit. And the saboteurs were gone. There was no firefight, no alarms, no casualties. Operation Gunnerside had succeeded, but the danger was far from over. They now had to escape, hunted, cold, and deep in enemy territory. Orders from Berlin came fast and without mercy. The entire region was to be locked down. The saboteurs were to be hunted, and when caught, they were to be made an example of, a warning to anyone who dared resist. Within hours, southern Norway bristled with German forces. Troops stormed mountain villages and set up roadblocks. Ski patrols combed the forest. Spotter planes buzzed overhead. Civilians were questioned harshly. Cabins were ransacked, and families lived in fear. But the men they sought were already gone. There was no celebration, no victory speech. The saboteurs had slipped back into the wilderness the same way they had arrived, silently, swiftly, and without a trace. With skis underfoot and weapons slung across their backs, they vanished into the snow-covered mountains, leaving only destruction in their wake. Some found shelter with brave local families, Norwegians who risked their lives to provide warmth, food, and safe passage to men they barely knew. Others kept moving through the night, navigating by stars and compass, sleeping in caves or digging shelters into the deep drifts of snow to survive the cold. One of them, Nut Haukelid, broke off alone. Over the course of several brutal days, he traversed more than 400 kilometres of frozen wilderness to reach the safety of neutral Sweden. He carried almost nothing. His hands were frostbitten. German patrols weren't far behind, but he never stopped moving. And somehow, he made it. In fact, they all did. Not a single saboteur was ever captured. Not a single bullet was fired during their escape. They had come and gone like shadows, and behind them, they had left the Nazi nuclear program in ruins. The men of Operation Gunnercide didn't return home as conquering heroes. They slipped back into quiet lives, some returning to civilian work, others continuing the fight in other corners of Europe. But none of them sought fame. In a war defined by tanks, firebombs, and armies in the millions, it's easy to overlook the missions that happened in silence, carried out by small teams of determined men with no expectation of reward. They weren't generals or statesmen, they were saboteurs, skiers, sons of Norway. And in one frozen moment, with courage and conviction as their only weapons, they struck a blow that just might have changed the course of history. In the end, they didn't just destroy a factory, they may have saved the world. For more epic tales from the War Stories archive, hit that subscribe button to enlist today. Then, pick one of the stories on screen to select your next mission. Over and out, soldier.